Hello everyone. I extend a warm welcome on behalf of Meghnad Desai Academy of Economics to all the panelists who are here today. And I thank them for being with us. And I also thank all the attendees who have joined us. I think you all are aware that Meghnad Desai Academy offers specialization in policy courses in our one-year postgraduate diploma course in economics, and where we teach behavioral economics to students and also public policy of development. And both these courses are taught by Professor Anirudh at the Academy. And now, since we are almost done with these courses and students are looking for job opportunities in this area, we thought of arranging a panel discussion where they'll get an idea of how to go about it. And that's the reason we have organized this. I'm sure you will enjoy this session because we have experts here. So thank you once again, all of you, for joining. And I request Anirudh to introduce the speakers of the day and take forward. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Tapke. I think there's something with Savita's video. So I'm not sure how to fix that. Anyway, let me maybe Savita, I guess if you rejoin or something, it might.
Okay, I'm here, Anirudh. Just that
Sure.
I can't switch on video.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I think it's the host has controlled it.
Oh, I see. Okay. No worries. Maybe we'll try and fix that by the time.
Sure.
Thanks again, Dr. Tapke, for introducing the session. So, like she said, so I'm Anirudh. I'm Anirudh Taggart, and I'm visiting faculty at Meghnad Desai Academy of Economics, and I've been teaching these past couple of months, well, more than a past couple of months now, on a couple of courses on the public policy elective, which one which deals with behavioral and experimental economics, in which we have our panelists today who are going to be, I think, sharing their sort of very varied experiences in terms of both practice as well as research, which I'm very excited to hear about. And the other course that I teach is on public policy of development, which kind of applies some of the insights from behavioral science as well, because at the end of the day, I'm also a behavioral economics researcher, so it's really hard for me to teach development without really referring back to some of those things. So let me take a minute maybe to introduce our panelists for today. So we have Biju Dominic with us. He's the Chief Evangelist of Fractal and Chairman of Final Mile Consulting. And at Fractal, he's basically working at the intersection of human and machine intelligence, and driven by the belief that the more we understand about the inscrutable algorithm in our brains, the better with the technology we will develop for our machines. He's been practicing in behavioral economics in India probably even before there was behavioral economics in India. So in that sense, there's much to learn from his work, and sort of going beyond, just going beyond research, going beyond sort of what we know from experiments in our laboratories. So I think that's a wonderful kind of perspective that we'll get today in terms of some of the work that we've done. I'm sure that many of you might have heard about the example of the most popular project of Final Mile, of course, is the one of the railway tracks, which if you don't know about, I'm not going to describe it because you should go look it up. So that's probably because that's just how I think iconic and also how important it was in terms of understanding behavioral science in the Indian context. So thanks Biju for joining us today. I'm also happy to introduce my colleague, Dr. Savita Kulkarni, who's my collaborator, and we worked together on a few projects. She's assistant professor at the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, and that's a institutional partner for Meghnad Desai Academy of Economics now. So in that sense, we have one more way to associate. She works and she teaches and she works in behavioral economics, behavioral finance, development economics as well, and she teaches a little bit of econometrics and art programming at Gokhale as well. Her research has been published in Economic and Political Weekly, which is EPW, the International Journal of Applied Behavioral Economics, and she's worked extensively with both lab experiments as well as field experiments in various parts of Maharashtra. So it'd be nice to hear about some of those things. And she more recently, she set up the Center for Behavioral Economics at Gokhale, which is a wonderful effort to kind of build capacity in doing behavioral economics research, both within the academic sphere as well as government agencies. So welcome, Savita. Thanks so much for joining us. And I would like to introduce also Ankita. So Ankita Agar is an alumnus of MDAE. She graduated in 2021 and last year. It seems like a long time ago, but thanks for joining us, Ankita. And she works as a behavioral researcher at Morningstar Inc. Morningstar Inc. is a financial consulting agency, financial services consulting agency, and who has a substantial sort of work area in behavioral science. And they're doing some of the more cutting edge work in terms of incorporating behavioral science into financial behavior, things of that sort. Thanks for joining us, Ankita. So, okay, so we'll probably get started in the same order that I introduced everyone, and then maybe I'll go last because I would probably just share more from the MDAE perspective. So maybe we can hear from Biju first about a little bit about your experience with doing behavioral research in India, kind of what are the career prospects that some of these students can potentially look forward to, and maybe a little bit on the future, because I'd like to hear about that as well. Over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Just to, as Anirudh mentioned, I think we started looking at behavioral science or behavioral economics is actually one part of the work we do. A lot of learning we also take from neuroscience and other behavioral facets of sociology and anthropology. But I think we started in 2007 and way ahead. I think Professor Taylor was really surprised somewhere in the late, I think 2010, 11, when he met me that there is a firm that is already applying some of his theories and well. And so he used to invite me to Chicago booth to take sessions because he could, no more it was a theory. It was actually a lot of practice, how to get people to use toilets, how to reduce road accidents, how you can reduce trespassing deaths or how do you reduce the HIV spreading in Africa. So the last 15 years, I think we've possibly, you mentioned a human behavior problem, and I think we have stepped in. And I think one of the things we can very confidently say is that I think the solutions that we developed were clearly superior to what has traditionally been done to tackle those particular problems. And recently, because we work a lot with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the BMGF, mostly in Africa. Most of our work is in Africa, in the area of healthcare, mostly HIV. And a lot of that work is published, so you can actually read that. A lot of work has been awarded because of the research methodologies that we developed, obviously the solutions. So I would request you to go through that. But many times people might say, what is the relevance of behavioral science? I think the recent example is the best of it, which is saying that, yes, we had this COVID, it was a very, very difficult task. In no time, the virologist and the epidemiologist and the best experts came down and said, we need a vaccine. That's the only way to stop this. They said it takes about 8 to 10 years. But in about 7-8 months, they came together and developed a vaccine. Not just the vaccine, I think the whole supply chain of it, which is the courier companies, the transportation companies, the companies like a Carrier, which is looking at, the support of it. They all developed it. But what happened was finally we got it all done in a matter of 8-10 months. But how to get the person to walk across to the nearest hospital or healthcare center and get himself or herself vaccinated, we didn't know what to do with. And that is right now a project which Final Mile is doing, which is why did vaccine hesitancy happen? And what could be done to make sure that a vaccine hesitancy does not happen again? Or let me talk about the future when I think Anirudh asked. That's a project which my team is doing right now. Now we hear so much about digital marketing, but billions of dollars are being spent on digital marketing. Companies like Facebook and Google are all based, built around, the whole facet of the digital marketing, because advertising, and that is actually their foundation. But there is a data point which a lot of us ignore. 1996, when digital advertising started, the click-through rate was about 46%. And now 2019, the click-through rate is 0.46, which means the click-through rate has actually come down 100 times. Now, why is it so? How can I improve the click-through rates in e-commerce? Is possibly an area that we are working on. And another area that we're working on is the medical world has gone ahead. They developed medicines for almost all the things in life. But what we still haven't figured out is that how do you make sure that people take medications on a regular basis? Medical non-adherence is actually costing the insurance companies in the world, I mean, at least in the US alone, close to about 300 billion is the cost of it. So these are some of the projects that we're working on. So yes, in the past, we have done very interesting work in the last 15 years. But as we look forward, there's no doubt about it, that human behavior is a very significant area where we don't know what to do about, how to deal with it. And that's where behavioral science will play a very significant role.
Okay. Thanks so much, Biju, for sharing. So maybe we'll circle back and come back to you on a few more things, maybe that the audience would also like to hear about. But yeah, I'm really excited about the e-commerce part. I think that the click-through rate is something that I think not just, like you said, big organizations and big corporations might be interested. I think it's kind of more of a, it's become a universal problem in that sense. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Okay, so why don't we go to Savita? So maybe Savita, you can tell us a little bit about some of the experiments, some of the research, and some of the teaching as well, because I think some of the students might be interested in hearing about that.
Yes. Thanks, Anirudh and your entire team for having me here. So we at Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, we recently have set up this Center for Behavioral Economics, and I'm happy that both Biju and Anirudh could be at Gokhale Institute to share their views at the institute. So thanks for that. So at Gokhale Institute, being a more academic institution, we are more into awareness, creating awareness, or spreading awareness and creating research capacity in behavioral and mainly behavioral economics, not so much into behavioral sciences. As you understand, both are very different. So we are more into behavioral economics, and we have been doing various workshops for students, for undergraduate, for postgraduate, as well as some of the practitioners, and for corporate houses, kind of giving them customized solutions, or helping them to come up with the customized solution, or to helping them understand the problem that they might be facing. So that's our key area to work with. Simultaneously, we are also having both both undergrad and postgraduate course, only 4-credit course on behavioral economics, and also one course in behavioral finance. In addition, if some students are interested in doing PhDs, doctoral research in behavioral economics, then we also have capacity for that. We also have a laboratory, kind of computer laboratory, where we can conduct laboratory experiments, which is also essential essential research method to extend research in behavioral economics. So we have that capacity at Gokhale Institute. And by and large, coming from academia, this is what I feel, that both academic research and practitioners experience both can complement each other, and that will rather help to advance the subject in itself, because the way otherwise we study all the economic subjects, I'm very sure that there is scope to integrate behavioral insights and to come up with a better solutions, better policy tools. And that's the reason why I advocate, that's what I feel about academic research is equally important as it with the practitioners. So we are advancing for that, and that's why creating this research capacity at students level. So that's very brief from GRP. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Savita. So I think that it also kind of speaks to just the range of work I think that's going on there, like just being able to impart training not just to students who might be interested in behavioral economics, but also then being approached potentially by other stakeholders, government, similar to how it might work at Final Mile, probably being able to sensitize them and help them understand the power of behavioral science, behavioral economics in that context. So. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for sharing that. We'll probably again come back in case there are questions specifically about also maybe some of the courses that you've been teaching. So let's go to Ankita and let's maybe hear a little bit about your experience with working at Morningstar, kind of what maybe a regular workday is also like that might be interesting to hear. And yeah, I think anything else that maybe MDAE kind of helped you prepare for in terms of your work today.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here. I graduated from MDAE in 2021 and then got into Morningstar through campus placement, and I did my PGD course in economics at MDAE. My electives were a combination of public policy and data science. So behavioral science as a subject was introduced to me at MDAE. So I got to learn my fundamentals here. A little bit about what my team does at Morningstar. So we have a lot of PhD scholars, behavioral scientists, and social practitioners, and we've been focusing to help investors and financial advisors to overcome behavioral biases and understand themselves and the clients better. So we have been conducting original and authentic primary research to understand investor behavior, and also been conducting a lot of experiments, RCTs, and surveys to basically uncover what's happening within investors and help advisors become aware of this. So apart from doing this, we also, just to make it available to researchers, we write a lot of research papers and white papers. And then the next thing we do is we use these insights from the research we conduct and insights from the behavioral science literature. And we design products for advisors which will help them to understand their clients better and use these interventions to mitigate the effects of various behavioral biases investors have. So the goal of the whole behavior insight team is basically use the insights behavioral science has and put them across different stages and departments of Morningstar, like Morningstar products, management services, communication, user research, and other studies. So we do provide consulting to various departments within the organization and also help them with the products. Yeah. So majorly what my role here is, my role demands me to conduct primary research using theories we read in books and apply it to industry and market. We use statistical analysis to conduct these researches, and once we establish a significant relationship, we either try to develop them into tools or methodologies which can be used by our clients and integrate them into like existing Morningstar products. So apart from like developing methodologies, we also revise and review existing methodologies too, like conducting renorming activities. So yeah, that's what my whole role has been till date. Mostly I think how MDAE helped me for this role is definitely building my skills, from getting into Morningstar to also delivering my job role, whatever it demands me, like get my job competencies done. So I majorly think in this role, there are actually 5 key skills I've observed is required. One is research and its fundamental. So I think in that public policy and majorly public policy course, like I took the elective, so it helped me understand research, the framework of research, like how you start with it and how you write a paper and how you tweak these research framework as your problem statement changes. So yeah, that was one thing I learned. So next, I feel like technical skills are very important, and I did the Python course here at MDAE. So I think it was amazing because the faculty takes effort into like teaching from the scratch till being an advanced, till the advanced level. So So definitely it's a very important skill here in behavioral science. So yeah, this skill here. So yeah, like Python and R were two softwares I've been using. And then for data analysis, definitely I took the econometrics course and I also took the advanced econometrics. So that has been helping me a lot. I think here in my role, I've been doing a lot of advanced level of statistical research. So to understand these stats, like advanced models, I've understood that your fundamentals need to be clear. So anything you can learn from MDE is the fundamentals. It's very important because no classroom is going to teach you these advanced models. It's difficult, and you need to learn on your own as whatever your job role demands. So, but to understand the advanced stuff, you really need your fundamentals clear. So that is a very major takeaway for me. And definitely communication skills. I think students at MDE already know there's a lot of speaker sessions and talk sessions MDE encourages students to take up on their own. So it really helps you to be independent. You're not dependent on somebody else who's gonna come and help conduct the session. Usually students conduct everything on their own here. So yeah, that's amazing. And also like subjects like macroeconomics for me, every alternate session we had to do presentations. So they somewhere like make you go ease with talking in public. So that is amazing. So yeah, I think these are few skills I've learned from MBA, and this is how I've been using here. Yeah, that is it. If anybody has any questions, I would love to.
Thanks so much for sharing, Ankita. Yeah, I think like lots of useful stuff for both current students of MBA, probably with future students that are thinking of joining. So kind of gives us a lot of insight into maybe how do you translate things that you learn finally into what you do on a sort of regular basis at your job. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. So again, maybe if students have questions, like we can come back to you something specific about that. Okay. So let me maybe just highlight a little bit about some of the work that we do in terms of teaching at MBA. So we have, like Dr. Dapke was mentioning, basically we have this elective in public policy, and that we have a few courses that basically deal with various aspects of public policy development and also behavioral and experimental economics. Part of my motivation to teach behavioral and experimental economics here at MDAE stems from precisely trying to, I think, go from what we know from a lot of foundational theories, a lot of like seminal works in the domain, but to go from there to perhaps something that, as Ankita was describing, like something that you can perhaps more simplistically apply in your day-to-day in terms of the work that you might do in the future. So maybe I'll just describe the structure of that course and then a little bit about where it might help in terms of, say, again, the work that you might get in the future. So one aspect is certainly focusing on building a strong foundation, right? So similar to the thing that Biju said, which is that I think having this kind of foundational knowledge, having this kind of understanding of the basic concepts and being clear about it, I think that's important. And it's great because we are able to teach this course after students have gone through the basics of micro and macro and econometrics and all of these things. So I remember having discussions with Savita about how basically you need to have understanding of microeconomics before you can really jump into behavioral science and behavioral economics, right? So I think that having that base, having gone through a fairly rigorous course in microeconomics as well, is a core course at MDA. Most students are kind of aware of either the limitations or perhaps in some way the basic principles when it comes to microeconomics and some of these applications. So what we try and do in this course is to try and add some context to why the behavioral economics perspective in that sense is enriching that understanding, because at the end of the day, the way that it's framed is that it's a study of human decision making, that right? So at the end of the day, we're all mostly interested in why is this person doing this, right? So and then we're trying to come up with sort of competing explanations for that, and that's where the experimental part comes in, right? So and Sandra will tell you more if you need to hear it, but a very well designed experiment is basically meant to shut down many alternate explanations for why you're observing certain behavior, right? So the way that, at least the way that, again, we teach the experimental part is like after we've kind of covered some of these basic behavioral concepts, basic behavioral sort of findings, and then going into why it's important to design experiments in a particular way. We talk about lab experiments, field experiments, and a little bit about now the revolution in terms of the randomized controlled trials as well. And, the focus there is on trying to make sure that we have some kind of understanding of why this methodology is perhaps important in terms of helping us understand a little bit more and gather some more insights about human behavior, broadly speaking. And then I kind of spent some part of the last couple of maybe about 5 to 6 hours kind of dedicating some time to applying where current research, both in academia, both outside of academia, how it's been applied to study problems that are relevant to public policy. Because at the end of the day, we need to situate it in some broader framework. And the way that, it's framed in the public policy context, as Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein have said in their book, is that we need to nudge for good, right? So they don't really, I think increasingly it's becoming clear that behavioral science and behavioral economics is not something that, economists came up with. It's something that was already there, and it was already being used by marketing companies. It was being used by many other people well before it was called what it is called today. But I think in terms of nudging for good is something that, we talk about what is the potential for using, recognizing the fact that individuals that respond to policy are susceptible to these kinds of biases, are susceptible to certain changes in their decision-making environment. And, how do we, either as advisors to, or future advisors to policymakers, or as potentially as people who are observing this behavior or maybe tasked with understanding this behavior, like, I think it's important for us to have that perspective firsthand, so that we can design the policies in a way that will actually kind of, maximize engagement, but then also perhaps lead to some sort of social welfare outcome at the end of the day. I won't spend too much time talking about the public policy of development, but I will say that, and also because I'm also not yet done teaching it for this semester, but what we focus on is understanding public policy more from a much more broader perspective than purely from the economics point of view. So trying to think about problems of efficiency, which is well articulated so far in terms of many economic analyses, but also in terms of fairness, to try and understand how do we really understand the kind of policy outcomes that are occurring, and then go into thinking about how is policy designed, and and the way that at least I talk about policy in this course is not from the point of view of government alone, because I think we are clearly now in a world where government is no longer the sole agency that's in charge of policy, right? So we have fintech entrepreneurs, we have NGOs, we have social impact organizations. Almost all of them in some way or the other interact with policy. They might not certainly have the kind of democratic power that governments might have, but at the end of the day, at least they are also kind of involved in people's development, or people's well-being, if you can think of it that way. And again, not just people, certainly firms, households, all other units in the economy as well. So that's and when we kind of put it in a developing country context. So since some of my work, or rather most of my work, relates to India, I kind of cover a lot of Indian examples, development papers from development and public policy in India, but there's certainly, like Biju said, there's a lot of work that's going on in the African continent, and in Kenya, in Rwanda, in Ethiopia. There's a lot of RCTs that have been deployed. So we kind of look at these RCTs, not just to say that this is one way to test policy, but also kind of critique it to say that there are things that we can learn from it, but that also comes with its own set of limitations, and thinking about what is it that we perhaps cannot tell from these kinds of studies as well. So I'm going to stop there for fear of obviously taking up too much time. But thanks again to our panelists for speaking. So I think in case there's something else that you would like to add, I think this is a good time before we maybe go to the audience for question and answer. So if there's any maybe new project that you're working on, is there something else in behavioral science that excites you that you would like to share with the with the students or anything of that sort at all?
No, there's only one word of sort of an explanation that I want to give, especially when I think Savita put it well, that see, many a time people think behavioral science is only behavioral economics. It is just only one of the new sciences that have come in addition to the old psychology theories that existed for a fairly long time. But at Final Mile, we realized that that really the source of human behavior is actually the human brain. If you really want to understand the human behavior, we should actually understand all of neuroscience. And the shortcuts the brain takes, which is the heuristics, is only one facet of the brain. Now, many times people only look at the work of Taylor and Kahneman and others when you talk about heuristics. But I also want to remind the students who are listening to me, please also look up at the work of Gerd Gigerenzer of Max Planck Institute, who's looked at the whole theory of smart heuristics. So it's not about biases that he works on, but he talks about how very smart the brain is, and the brain has its own inherent, very smart ways of solving very complex problems. And understanding that really helps. For example, he gives the example of when a high ball is coming in, how should the runner run to take that particular ball? Where should he stand there, reach there to hold the ball? And if you look at the number of variables that are involved, wind velocity, what this at which the ball was hit, force at which the ball was hit, what is the angle at which the ball was hit, a lot of variables are there. None of it is available for us. But how does the man rush to take that particular catch? And he figured out the brain has a smart heuristics. And what is that? He says there's a gaze angle. That means the angle between me and the ball. And all that the runner does is to maintain that particular angle and runs faster, slower, and he's there right under it. So gaze heuristics is a smart heuristics, which not just humans, when you throw a frisbee to your favorite, your pet dog, the dog also takes exactly the same heuristics to actually be there to catch that particular thing. So understanding such things are also very, very important in understanding human decision-making process, more so under uncertainty. So I just want to remind you that the world of behavioral science is a much wider world. And as you get in order to solve some of the very significant problems in public policy or in organizations like the way Ankita was talking about in her organization, I know her, the person who started that organization. These are all people who've been looking at things in a certain way. Please broaden your horizon, because there are a lot of interesting sciences. The other very interesting area, these are all individual behaviors. Now, if you're trying to solve, say, a maternal health, to make sure a lady in UP, instead of giving birth to the child in her home, has to be taken to the healthcare center. Now, you suddenly realize it is not some nudges to her alone is not going to help. It's a whole ecosystem of her mother-in-law, her husband, the village pradhan, the ASHA worker, the health worker. So you'll realize my team has done a lot of work when all the work now at Final Mile desk is not about nudges. It's many times about systemic changes in the community, because it's not just about individual behavior. It is the behaviors of a whole community that you have to change. So it's a much more complex than a simple nudge and you will solve the problem. So don't ever look at human behavior problems in a very simplistic way, because it is the most complex thing that you can ever deal with.
Valuable stuff. Sorry, go ahead, Sarita. Yeah.
No, sorry, you can continue.
No, I was just going to say that that's actually a very important point to bring up at this stage of our discussion, because it is to say that exactly as both Biju and Sarita said, is that there's no one sort of perspective in terms of, because if you're in the game of, sorry to put it this way, but if you're in the game of understanding human behavior, there is no one field that gives you that answer, and that's really where the the power of behavioral science, behavioral economics sort of lies, in the sense that it's not constrained in that sense. So yeah, go ahead, Sarita.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, in addition to what Biju added, in the same line, I would like to say, I mean, because I'm talking from the academic perspective, from academic research perspective, we happen to review literature, and what I have realized is that most of the papers or most of the nudges which are designed are more for the Western countries, Western societies, and like there is a huge research gap as to how Indian society, Indian citizens from India would react to the same nudges that we would design for the same problem, and that's huge research scope. So I think that that's also reason why one need to underline the importance of evidence-based policy, first to best understand the context of the decision making from the Indian perspective, and then reiterate, design and reiterate and test the nudges. So there's a huge scope for behavioral economics integrated with as Ankita said, econometrics or experimental economics. Huge scope for that. Thanks.
Thanks for sharing that, Savita. Yeah, very, very much like, especially in the domain of public policy, it's something that I think has, as has been shown by a lot of research, again, not just by academics, but certainly by, like the case studies that Biju mentioned, like the big projects that they've been doing in Africa on HIV and HIV/AIDS. And I think that really shows that this is not that these are not problems that are solely the domain of academics or practitioners. I think that these are things that we would all likely actually work together on. So yeah, thanks. Ankita, anything else to add at all? Like, I mean, no pressure again, but there'll be probably some questions that I can go to.
I just wanted to add that I heard from Biju sir and Savita ma'am, and I think what Savita ma'am has said is absolutely right. Like, I'm working here at Morningstar for the past 1 year, and a lot of researches I've been a part of, it's all US-based market. And I've understood one thing, that I'm learning so many new techniques there, but there is a huge scope we can do the same thing like in India, just to analyze how is it gonna perform, like what are the results. Till now, we just understand that maybe the same thing, the way US market reacts, Indian market would not react the same way. So it's an opportunity to go and explore. And I think Indian companies are now, having behavioral science, behavioral insight as a part of their team. So there's a huge scope. I was a little, to be very honest, when I started my work at Morningstar, I was a little reluctant of taking up the job. I was not sure what is this? This is so new. What is going to happen further? Like, in 1 year, it has developed a lot, and a lot more development is required. But now I just feel, oh my God, there's a huge scope. And I thought, what if there's nothing? And what if it just stops? So yeah, this is one thing I think we as students need to understand this. So yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Ankita. I think that helps, and it shows that culture is not just important from an academic perspective. It's certainly important to be able to work it in, and I think recognize these differences exist even outside of our research. Okay, so thanks everyone for providing your input. So I will probably just use the rest of the time that we have to maybe go over some questions, and I'll pose them to maybe one of you, or I'm sure that you can all see the questions as well, but maybe I'll start off, and in case anyone has anything to add, please feel free to unmute and go for it. So I'll start with the first one that we got, which is how does behavioral economics shape public policy? I think we've covered a little bit of that, but in case Savita or Biju, in case you guys want to add anything in terms of where we see behavioral economics and public policy going.
Yeah, if Biju wants to go first. Okay. So question, behavioral economics shaping public policy. Let me to start with, let me also tell you that now we have a kind of sub discipline which also now recognizes behavioral public policy. So it's not now pure public policy, it's behavioral public policy. And that is the, that actually emphasizes how government across the world, and also in Indian context also, governments are government offices are interested in kind of collaborating with behavioral scientists and understand how people make decision, because most of the public policy are based on the traditional assumptions, something like, having more information allows people to make better decisions. But clearly that is not the case given the constraint of boundary rationality. So all these insights are incorporated, and that's what behavioral economics helps you to better understand. And with, again, as I said, with experimental economics and better understanding the decision making context, the delivery of public policy has improved, and that's what even Indian government is also striving for. So right, I think in 2015 we have first official chapter in economic survey which talks about the scope of behavioral economics for public policy. And recently we also have one official unit, behavioral insight unit at Niti Aayog, to practice it, to integrate that aspects. Also me, Anirudh and I were fortunate to deliver some of the workshops to some of the Indian government officials at tax department, to sensitize them as to what could be behavioral tendencies which might help them to improve the tax compliance. So clearly, at Indian government, in the Indian government also, officers are recognizing the importance of it, and there is a huge scope for that, clearly. Thanks.
And I'll just add too, because public policy it's all about human behavior, not just, and it could be about the end user, it could be about the bureaucrats and the government system. There are human beings of all type are there. And as Savita rightly mentioned, we have a traditional understanding of human behavior, and which is very rational. So you tell them the consequences of the problem and they would move away from the problem, or you give them incentives or give them some rewards and people would actually go ahead and do the right behavior. But in reality, that person just doesn't exist. That exists only in textbooks. In reality, life is much, much more complicated. Let me give you a problem that we worked on. We worked on the issue of girl trafficking. There are about 16 million people, girls are getting trafficked in India alone. Now, we study that problem in 24 Parganas in West Bengal and Warangal in Andhra Pradesh. Now, you generally just go and ask a father, will you let your child move into prostitution? Of course, how can it be? But it's happening. Now, how do you research that? How do you first understand the mindset of a father? That's the supply side, or the system or the village that pushes this girl into being trafficked. That's on the supply side. On the demand side, why do men go for paid sex? You stop a man in the street and say, hey, man, do you go for paid sex? He's not going to answer that question, but we need to understand, why does he do that? And that's where the complexity of, you're trying to say, oh, girl trafficking, let's have more policemen. Come on, none of the policing and legislations, if that's so, like rape. And as soon as you have a rape, you will say, build awareness. Now, which man in the world doesn't know, forget about raping, that I shouldn't even touch a woman, not even touch, I shouldn't even look at a woman inappropriately. So it's not an issue of awareness. That's the complexity of the human behavior that I want to bring about. So really want to make these policies work, then we should know why these things are happening. And unless we know the why of it, you will never be able to find how, which is the right solutions to implement in these places. That is why behavioral sciences is very, very, very important to make a public policy really work on ground.
Thanks. Thanks, Biju, and thanks, Avdaya. I think pretty valuable sort of insights into just thinking about how we can apply behavioral science into public policy. I think, as Savita said, there's a whole field called behavioral public policy that, in case you're interested in more of that, like, you should definitely look it up. It has quite a few. Now it's kind of a growing field of research as well. Okay, so I'll come back to you, Biju, because there's a question here on Fractal and Fractal Analytics being an AI-based company, and maybe Ankita, I would like to maybe see if you can contribute as well, which is about how data science is used in behavioral science projects, and if you have some examples of that.
Now, see, Fractal, is the world leader in data analytics and AI. And AI, it's all about data, machine learning, because that comes from the amount of data you have. I think the reason why Fractal Srikanth, who is the group CEO, and I decided that Final Mile and Fractal will come together was because we realized that data provides what is happening very well. And obviously, there are very, very sophisticated statistical models that everyone has developed, and Fractal has developed it better than most of the other firms to actually come up with, predict what the future would be. But I think there was clearly an understanding that still the why, we got the what from the data, but why is he doing what he's doing is not really there in the data because it's somewhere hidden out there. And that's where some of the research methodologies and the understanding that we have of behavioral sciences, the heuristics, the biases, they're all not there in the data. What data is just an output. But the behavioral science provides the why of why that data is sitting there like that. And then once we have a why, as I mentioned in the earlier case, then you have our designers. And so we have a design team who develops the interventions. The interventions are not just developed by anyone. There are designers who are really trained to do that. They develop how we can actually change the human behavior. So I think Fractal, we actually call it the triangle. We says there is AI, there is engineering, because AI really needs engineering support. Then there's a design behavioral science. So every project of Fractal, it's a combination of, we'll have AI experts, you will have engineering experts, you will have design and behavioral science experts there, because to understand the problem, to frame the problem, add on to the data, I think and this is where the behavioral science people really come in. Obviously, it's ahead of the curve, but I can tell you from those of you students who are planning to study it, yes, data analytics companies and AI companies will need it. And you can already see Ankita already doing a good job in that particular direction.
Yeah, so I think I would just say that using, like, from a very fundamental aspect, using data science, you learn it, we know that it has the computational power to understand behavior, to understand the trend, the change. You need to learn data science in order to use this computational power, to use this analysis, and then understand, how behavior is changing. This is like a very fundamental way I'm trying to explain. Not exactly what my role does, but yeah.
Sure. No, that helps. Yeah, thanks, Biju, and thanks, Ankita. I think there's another question here, which is, I'll just link to what we just discussed, which is on someone's pursuing a certificate course on data analytics from Coursera. So they're asking whether it's worth for a career in behavioral science. So maybe I'll just add a little bit, and then maybe Biju or Ankita or even Savita, if you guys have any thoughts on that, it would be good to get your opinions as well. My sense is that, and I think Biju saw this a long time ago, which is that data analytics is going to be very important in the future. So I think that regardless of probably what field I think that you'll be working in the future, I think having those kinds of skills, and more importantly, I think that way of approaching data and that way of thinking about how to analyze data, that's going to be kind of important. So I think that if you're doing the certificate course, then yeah, it's certainly something that you should be able to apply eventually, even if you were to pursue a behavioral science career. If any of the other panelists have any thoughts on that, maybe you can chime in.
No, to me, I like that person because, I can tell you, as I said, human behavior is so complex. It has to be looked at it from multiple angles. Data science. So you're doing a course on it. Congrats. Very good. It also shows that you're a person who's looking for wanting to learn more things. So, these are all indications that people look for when they do an interview of you, that you're doing multiple things, things from looking at things from multiple angles. Obviously, you want to get into behavioral science, but as I said, social sciences, sociology or anthropology, look at it from multiple angles, and those angles all will help you finally to really become a real good professional.
Wonderful. Thanks for chipping in there, Biju. So I'll take maybe a question from Ishwari, and she's asking about, and maybe even Ankita is in a good place to answer this. But basically, for a recent graduate young professional, what are the organizations and roles one should target apart from the final miles, Prasaras, and CSPCs in India? Because there's so much competition for the select few roles here, what skills are desired in candidates in these positions? So maybe Savita, if you want to try out first, in case you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think deep understanding, as we have been saying, fundamental understanding of the core subjects to start with, like, right from microeconomics, and then what behavioral sciences has to add to these subjects. I think those are also equally necessary. And in order to design, or for the, all the research related skills, because I believe sometimes we can't even approach a particular problem with the hypothesis, or thinking that this might be a problem, that there is a good scope to have the something called as a grounded theory. You actually just go and ask people as to what is happening, and from there try to come out with the possible hypothesis and then test. So the both qualitative and quantitative research methods would be useful. Apart from that, once these nudges are designed, or some policy behavioral interventions are designed, then testing them out and understanding the causes, why particular result is equally important. So back and forth, feedback, understanding the feedback, plugging that in the policies or in the nudges once again, and then testing that out. It's going to be a continuous process. So the patience for that, and then the extreme research skills for that. I think that's very important.
Thanks, Savita. Vijay, did you want to add anything?
No. If you ask me what I have, if you look at other than the co-founders of Final Mile, the next layer, almost all of them are people who sort of some class or the other that I was taking, and they heard and they felt interested and came over, and they've been in Final Mile for the last easily 10 years and more. Now, I can tell you what I look for in people is passion, because this is a new field. You need to show your real passion, and passion comes from your earning for learning. And Final Mile, some of you would know, we read all the developments in the world of behavioral science on a regular basis. So your passion of learning to me is a very, very important thing, because you're right, there are only few forms that are out there. And there are a lot of people who suddenly say, oh, this is a great, interesting field. But are you there just because it's a scope, or are you there because you're really passionate about it? And it's up to you to prove how you're passionate about it.
Lovely. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that's quite useful, because you have a mix of both, kind of skills that we observe, and then things that are a little bit more difficult to observe in terms of. But I think yeah, it's important to have probably both of those things. Ankita, is there anything that you want to add, like in terms of your own experience? Maybe is there something that you think is an important skill to have to kind of continue working in behavioral science? Okay, well, maybe I will come. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm having a little bit of internet issue. Sorry, I just get my video off.
It's okay.
Yeah, I think the most important skill I feel you need here is reading and learning. You need to be open to that. A lot of people have this question that how long or how many months do I need to learn data science? So this question a lot of people have asked me. So I think it's not like in 6 months you're going to finish it off. So just like that, even in behavioral economics, behavioral science, it's not a 6 month course and you're done. It depends. Industry to industry is also what I've observed. How I'm using behavioral science is absolutely different from how Biju sir has been using it, how Savita ma'am has been using it. So first, it depends on where your interest lies, which industry is that you're focusing on, and then explore what you can do further in that space. So yeah, that is what my observation is.
Yep. Thanks, Ankita, for sharing that. So I think that kind of overlaps with also what Viju mentioned about having this, appetite for reading, consuming a lot of information, a lot of knowledge that's out there. I think the only thing that I will add in terms of organizations is that it's like Viju said, it's a growing field. I remember a few years ago, we all had a meetup at Gokle, and there were quite a few sort of, I think behavioral science enthusiasts, for lack of a better word, and I think we were all sort of discussing, is this the community in India? I mean, at that time, it probably was. And I think today, like, there are a few more organizations I think that are doing work. I know that there's a company called Bias, which is Behavioral Insights, Architecture and Strategy. They're based in Delhi. I think that increasingly there's also behavioral science that's coming up within consulting organizations more broadly. So it might not be their core sort of area of work, but I think it is, testament to what we've been talking about today. It's increasing in terms of its importance from both like a business consulting perspective, as well as more from a research perspective and an insights perspective as well. It's a shameless plug, but I work for a company called Monk Prayogshala, and we've been doing research in behavioral economics as well for some time. And I think that one of the things, there's a small lab, I think, in TCS in Pune. Sorry, it's not a small lab, it's a big lab, but they work in research and development, and they use a little bit of behavioral insights as well. So there are a few places. And I think today, certainly a little bit digging around, you'll probably be able to find it, Ishwari. So hopefully you'll be on your way. Okay, so I think just a few more minutes left, so I won't take much more of your time, guys. So maybe let me ask more broadly, how can a public health specialist work more in the field of behavioral sciences? And I think Biju has mentioned a little bit about that in terms of the work that they're doing, especially in infectious diseases. Anything to add on that, Biju, like in terms of where this intersection of public health and maybe behavioral sciences is coming from?
Ram, who's my CEO, and I think he's been heading that business for a fairly long time, he would vouch for the fact that when it comes to public health, more so, behavioral science will play a very, very significant role, and not just in India, across the world. And I think that's where remember, some of final mile people, they also get hired by the funders like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, BMGF, USAID. So it's also an opportunity, but it's also a reminder that when it comes to health care, behavioral science will play a very significant role. So I think that's an exhortation to those of you who are students to keep that in mind.
Thanks, Viju. I think the other thing that I will add in terms of the importance of public health, or how public health is kind of now, is like, again, as we heard about before from Viju, is about how the COVID-19 pandemic, I think, in many ways has really involved a lot more behavioral science. We no longer sort of look at vaccine development as just something that is clearly a medical issue, and like this is the work of clinical researchers who develop vaccines, and boom, you give it to people and they'll take it, and we've solved the pandemic problem. So I think it's much more, as we've been talking about today, it's far more complex than that, and I think it's useful to keep that in mind. And I don't think any of the things that we are saying are things that we came up with. I think that these are things that have been, kind of emphasized, repeated, like Viju was saying. If you read more, then you'll see that, that these are things that even health researchers, especially those working at the intersection of behavioral science and public health, they've been talking about for a while, well before there was a pandemic that moved us into this format now that we've all gotten very comfortable with. So I think that that's something to think about. And yeah, certainly COVID is something that probably will be studied for some more time, not just by public health researchers, but also by behavioral scientists. Okay, so one last question. How important do you think a formal education, for example, a master's degree, is important for establishing a career in behavioral science, as opposed to doing online courses or internships? So Savita, maybe I'll come to you first and then go over to.
When in today's world, like in online world, we have a lot of resources and they're equally valuable. So we can't really say that, these are actually substitute, like, classroom versus online. But I do feel the importance of offline education, having interaction with your fellow members, fellow students, and that interaction, that discussion also helps you to actually come out with the more insights. You can understand more insights about the same tendency, same behavioral concept from various perspectives. Plus, if the hands-on learning, hands-on workshop of conducting experiments, if that is also part of such offline courses, that would be really wonderful. So yeah, I mean, I don't have any firm position to actually to say.
No, I would actually say when I started getting interested or looking at this, it's the late 90s. Nothing existed. There were no books. Obviously, there were no courses. But then the few books that I had, I used to read. But then somewhere towards the 2000, early 2000s and all, few more books appeared. But today, there are not just books, there are courses. There are a lot of universities where this is taught. I mean, this itself is, Meghnad Desai itself is one of the places where this is taught. So I think having a formal degree helps because it starts your conversation with the prospective employer. It also provides you, like people like Anirudh and all are teaching you very rigorously, even Savita, you're all, so I'm telling the students, these are all professors who now teach you the rigor at the theoretical level, the constructs of it, and that academic rigor is very, very important to begin with. And I would actually exhort you to actually go for one of these courses and take that. But I'll never ask you to stop here. I'm sure they won't ask you to stop here. And that's why I said there are a lot of books today, a lot of articles today, a lot of podcasts today. I would exhort you to add to your academic knowledge, which these professors will provide you with a lot of readings from the other books that I have. So it's a combination of, and most of these books are written by practitioners or other areas. So you get a good combination. And I said that combination is what, when you sit in an interview, what I said will be converted into your passion for this. And that's how people like us, when I do an interview and I can feel that, I can see it in their eyes, I can feel it in their voice. And that's what I would exhort you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Biju. And I think that, so that means that probably that, a master's degree is, maybe one signal of, whether you might be the right candidate for a particular role in behavioral science. But I think by no way is it, definitive in that sense. I think that a lot of it comes down to how much you've read and how much you've been able to cultivate your own interest, I think, in behavioral science. So I saw that there was perhaps a couple of questions in the chat, which I did not see earlier, and I apologize for that. But, one of it is kind of more of a technical question from Abhishek, which is about how does one deal with the political context of public policy, which is that there might be resistance to some of the policies that we put up, especially from the behavioral science point of view. So maybe just briefly, Viju, can I ask if you've had any experience, or even Savita, if you guys have had any experience where a particular policymaker implements something and has a lot of backlash in that sense?
First of all, our experience with dealing with politicians and the bureaucrats in India, they're some of the most open set of people that I ever seen. So I think they're very, very open. Most of the politicians, I can tell you, at the topmost levels, you go and meet these politicians. They're all they're very happy. Obviously, they'll ask you very intelligent questions. Bureaucrats, the IS officers, outstanding people that I come across when you deal with new information around there. So the problem is not at that level. The problem is at the people who are to sort of receive that. But they have too many biases, there are too many complexities, and we don't understand them. And that is where the real block is. So it's not at the politicians, it's not at the bureaucracy, it's more of trying to understand the problem. Now, especially when it's an IS officer who's been working as a collector in the field for a long time, you can't go and give academic things alone to him or to her. You have to be very, very practical when you go and trying to say, now this is where this would actually solve. So it is not as simple as a problem is lying with some political leadership. I think the complexity of the problem as to why things are not happening is much wider. And So that's where I would put it.
Savita, anything to add? Yeah, sir.
Yeah. Uh, I'm not very sure from the practical perspective again, but in the research and academia community, recently people are like, academicians are highly recommending something called as a for good framework, which is basically which addresses the ethical concerns of introducing nudges. Because some people do have concern that, whether nudges would compromise on liberty of citizens. And that's why these mechanism or these institutions which will take care of the ethical concerns of population of citizens involved, if that is implemented, if there is high amount of transparency and accountability, I believe that there would be not much resistance to incorporate behavioral insights in public policy. Thanks.
Thanks for sharing that, Savita. Yeah, and great points from both of you. I think that kind of encapsulates that there is probably something that we might expect, but then often the reality might not be quite so straightforward. But and yeah, thanks for raising that question, Abhishek. I'll just take maybe one last question, just from Zapayan. So, is the power of behavioral science being used in policies regarding climate change and energy security? If not, how can behavioral science contribute? So I will just say one quick thing before, maybe in case Savita, Biju, or even Ankita, in case you have any thoughts on that, which is that there is increasingly scope for studying sort of behavioral in the environmental sciences sort of context. So especially given the threats of climate change. One thing that I probably should mention is that in fact MDAE has a short online course that's going on right now, which is on policy and sustainability, in which Biju is also going to be speaking soon, and I am currently teaching. So that's again another shameless plug, but make of that what you will. Biju, Savita, in case you guys have anything to add on that.
No, I just want to add that when you talk about sustainability or climate change and behavioral science, Kahneman himself has thrown up his hands and said, "Oh, getting people to actually change, think of a future which is very uncertain, which is going to happen much later. I mean, something that's going to happen in future, and then get people to now change their present behavior," he said, is an impossible task. Obviously, Kahneman has always been a bit, very pessimistic in his where this can be used, whereas Taylor, I realize, is very positive. But I think in the course and other things that Anirudh and I am trying to do, we're trying to still see what is that we can do. For example, religion has done an excellent job of making sure your present behavior is, your future behavior is taken care of. And you, for a future, you actually take care of your present behavior. How do they do? They created the concept of God and, heaven and hell. And they created the concept of a soul that will live far beyond. So there are people who have actually managed to actually tell you that for a future, please take care of your present behavior. So I don't fully agree with Kahneman, but there are ways in which we can bring in behavioral science to deal with the issue of sustainability and climate control. But it's a tough human behavior problem. It's a very tough human behavior problem, there's no doubt.
Yeah, so quickly to add, as Viju said, one, this intertemporal, cost today versus benefit in future, that is the first discrepancy to tackle with, along with something called as a status quo bias or the inertia in our behavior. Given the time time shortage, I think OECD has documented various case studies in the environmental domain. I think there is a document of 100 case studies in behavioral behavior interventions. So that may be useful for students to look at.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Biju, and thanks, Savita. I think the only thing that I will say on that front, sorry, Ankita, were you going to say something?
Yeah, maybe a little, but my take is not exactly on public policy, but ESG right now is a very big deal in every company. So we ourselves have been doing research on how people demand ESG and how they want their portfolios to be diverse. So I think we've started, our take on ESG and why it is important and how popular it is. So I think there is a huge scope using behavioral science and behavioral insights with ESG. So yeah, I think that's one thing we just started exploring. So I just thought I should share it.
Yeah, no, very much so. And I think, yeah, the ESG angle is kind of important to consider as well. And I think that hopefully we'll see more of behavioral science kind of coming into that, to that domain as well. So I think we're out of time, and I'm certainly, you know, a little bit in terms of the questions that we've answered. I think we want address like actually quite a diverse range of questions. So let me take this opportunity to thank Biju, thank Savita, and thank Ankita for being here and for patiently answering all these questions. I'm also grateful to Dabke ma'am for sort of putting this together on fairly short notice. So and thank you, of course, thank you to the panelists for kind of making time to be here and speak to our students as well as potential students. Yeah, I think everyone really appreciated it. I'm just going to drop one link to a behavioral science newsletter. So as Biju said, behavioral science knowledge is now no longer solely found in books and in research papers and things. So to update yourself, and I find that it's a great way to kind of stay in touch with what's going on in the field as well. So you could probably sign up. Over to you, Dabke. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Biju, for being with us this evening. I know in spite of your busy schedule, I keep bothering you, but yeah, I mean, your insights were really very, very useful. And I'm sure students had a lot to take away, So same with Kavita, Savita being an academician, her inputs are also valuable equally because yeah, even what we at Academy try to do is we try to bring together the academic aspect as well as the application part of it. And, both two with that synergy, I think one learns a lot. And as we all know that human mind is so complex, and so to all those who are doing research on that, and then on the basis of that, advising the policymakers, I think it's a brilliant job you all are doing. I must say that. So I'm sure students, those who have attended, must have learned a lot. And so thank you all once again. Thank you, Ankita, for being with us. Ankita was a student of MDAE and she's doing so well today. We are very proud of her. And of course, our own Professor Anirudh. Thank you, everybody. And thank you all the attendees. I'm sure you all have a lot to take away from this session. Thanks a lot.